The relentless Montana winter was a canvas of white, a merciless expanse where the wind howled ancient lullabies through skeletal pines. Jack, a man scarred by the silent battles waged within his own mind, found solace in this isolation, a rustic cabin, his sanctuary from the ghosts of a war long past. His days were a monotonous rhythm of chopping wood, tending the meager fire, and gazing at the endless snow, each flake a reminder of the quiet void that had settled in his soul since returning from the front. PTSD was a shadow that stalked him, heavy and pervasive, dimming life's vibrant colors to a dull gray. He sought no company, offered no warmth, his heart a fortress against the world. Then, on a particularly brutal night, when the mercury plummeted to an unthinkable temperature and the blizzard roared with a primal fury, something stirred on his porch. A faint whimper, almost swallowed by the wind's roar, pierced the thick walls of his self-imposed solitude. He hesitated, his instincts screaming caution, but a deeper, older part of him, one that still remembered compassion despite the scars, pulled him to the door. He squinted into the white haze, the cold biting at his exposed skin. There, huddled against the frozen wood, was a tiny, trembling bundle. It was impossibly small, no bigger than his gloved fist, covered in dark, matted fur, frozen to the planks. "Just a pup," he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse, a strange tremor of something akin to hope stirring in his chest. He knelt. His calloused hands, once adept at wielding weapons of destruction, now moved with surprising gentleness. The creature was barely breathing, its tiny body a block of ice. He scooped it up, cradling its fragile form against his chest, feeling the faint, fluttering heartbeat against his palm. Inside, by the crackling fireplace, he carefully unwrapped the creature from his scarf. It was a miniature enigma, black as midnight, its eyes sealed shut by a layer of ice. He found an old, chipped coffee mug, filled it with warm milk, and with great effort dripped it into the pup's mouth, willing it to live. He named it Shadow, a simple name for a creature found in the darkest hour, a silent companion to his own inner shadows. He didn't know then that this small act of kindness, this desperate fight for a tiny life, would be the first ripple in a wave that would redefine his existence, challenge his understanding of loyalty, and ultimately save his own soul. The pup whimpered, a fragile sound that seemed to echo in the vast silence of the cabin, a tiny spark against the overwhelming darkness. Jack watched over it through the long, lonely night, a sentinel against the encroaching cold and the lingering specters of his past. He felt a flicker of purpose, a warmth he hadn't known in years, slowly rekindling within him. The creature, so vulnerable, so dependent, was a lifeline, pulling him back from the precipice of his despair. He saved it, yes, but in a deeper, more profound sense, it was already beginning to save him. Winter's grip remained, but inside the cabin, a new, fragile life had begun to bloom. A silent promise whispered between man and beast, an unspoken pact forged in the heart of the wilderness. He knew nothing of its true nature, only that it needed him, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt truly needed. The small, dark form stirred, nestled warmly in the makeshift bed he had prepared, and a soft, contented sigh escaped its tiny lungs. Jack allowed himself a small, rare smile. It was just a pup, he thought, just a lost little creature, a simple comfort in a complicated world. He couldn't have been more wrong. The real journey, a dangerous dance between instinct and law, was only just beginning, its rhythm set by the pulsing heart of the creature he now so loved. The initial weeks blended into a routine of feeding, warmth, and a watchful tenderness Jack hadn't known he possessed. Shadow, as if propelled by some unseen force, devoured each meal with an insatiable hunger, growing at a rate that would have astonished anyone but a man lost in his own world. What began as a creature that fit comfortably in a coffee mug soon outgrew a shoebox, then a laundry basket, and before Jack could fully comprehend the passage of time, it was already too large for his lap. Its coat, initially a dull, matted black, had transformed into sleek, dense fur, the color of a moonless night, shining with an almost supernatural sheen. But it wasn't just the size that began to subtly shift Jack's perception. It was the eyes. Those initially closed, then opaque, black beads now glowed with an unsettling intelligence, a piercing amber that held the depth of ancient forests, a gaze far too wise for a mere pup. They watched him, always, with an intensity that bordered on the unnerving. Shadow's movements were fluid, silent, and incredibly graceful, a stark contrast to the clumsy antics of typical pups. He didn't bark, not in the way a dog would, but rather communicated through a series of low growls, soft whimpers, and increasingly a haunting, drawn-out sound that raised the hairs on Jack's arms, a nascent howl. He would sit by the cabin window, head cocked, his amber eyes fixed on the distant tree line, a low, resonant hum vibrating in his chest, before letting out a melancholy lament that echoed the desolate beauty of the Montana wilderness. Jack, accustomed to the eerie silence of his own mind, found himself mesmerized, a strange mix of awe and unease coiling in his stomach. He rationalized, of course. He's just a big breed, he'd murmur to himself, recalling vague memories of husky or shepherd mixes from his childhood. Maybe some wolf dog in there. But the truth, a quiet, persistent whisper at the back of his mind, was that Shadow didn't move like any dog he'd ever seen. He stalked, he observed. He listened with a keen awareness of his surroundings that felt more predator than pet. The pup's instincts were equally disconcerting. Instead of playful nips, Shadow had a powerful, almost surgical bite. Though never directed at Jack, always at his chew toys, which were destroyed with alarming efficiency. He possessed an uncanny ability to navigate treacherous snows, his large paws seeming to float over drifts that would swallow a man. And he was fiercely protective. When a stray deer ventured too close to the cabin, Shadow would stand at the edge of the clearing, a silent, imposing guardian, hackles raised, a low, guttural growl rumbling deep in his chest, sending the deer scattering back into the forest. Jack initially found this endearing, a testament to Shadow's loyalty. He felt safer, more secure, with this magnificent creature by his side. The lingering anxiety of his PTSD, the constant hypervigilance, began to recede, replaced by a different kind of vigilance, one that came from caring for another and being cared for in return. Yet there were moments, fleeting and unsettling, when Jack would catch Shadow's reflection in the window pane, or see him silhouetted against the rising sun, and a shiver would run down his spine. The sheer size, the powerful musculature, the wild glint in those amber eyes. It was magnificent, yes, but also undeniably primal. He was raising something extraordinary, something that defied easy categorization. He had found a companion, a guardian, a silent healer, but the true nature of his charge remained a mystery, a beautiful, untamed secret, growing larger and more apparent with each passing day. The snow still fell, the wind still howled, but now a new sound joined the symphony of the wilderness around Jack's cabin. The deep, resonant call of a creature finding its voice, a voice that spoke of ancient lineage and untamed spirit, a voice that hinted at a truth far more complex and dangerous than a simple abandoned pup. Jack, despite his growing unease, was irrevocably bound to this creature, his heart intertwined with its wild spirit, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, a storm that would soon reveal his beloved Shadow's true identity and shatter the fragile peace he had found. With each passing day, Shadow's presence wove itself more deeply into the fabric of Jack's solitary existence, mending fissures in his soul he thought irreparable. The creature, now undeniably large and imposing, moved through the cabin with a silent grace, a constant comforting weight at Jack's periphery. The encroaching shadows of PTSD, the sudden jolts, the vivid nightmares, the suffocating anxiety that had been his unwelcome companions for years, began to recede, replaced by a newfound sense of peace. Shadow became his anchor, a silent sentinel against the internal chaos. When the nightmares came, twisting combat memories into vivid, terrifying realities, Jack would wake in cold sweats, his heart hammering against his ribs. But now, Shadow would be there, a warm, heavy presence by the bed, a gentle nudge of his massive head against Jack's hand, a low, comforting rumble in his chest. In those moments, the terror would dissipate, replaced by the grounded reality of the animal's unwavering presence. Jack found himself talking to Shadow, sharing the burdens he couldn't articulate to another human. He recounted fragments of his past, the horrors he'd witnessed, the guilt that gnawed at him, his voice soft, almost a whisper in the cabin's silence. Shadow listened, head cocked, those intelligent amber eyes fixed on Jack, seemingly comprehending every inflection, every unspoken pain. It was therapy, unlike any he'd ever experienced, a non-judgmental acceptance that allowed him to unburden his spirit without fear. The animal's silent companionship filled the cavernous void left by lost comrades and a fractured life. Jack began to venture out more, not just for chores, but for long, silent walks through the snow-covered forest. Shadow always at his side, indeed a powerful, protective shadow. He felt a sense of security he hadn't known since before the war, a feeling that no harm could befall him with this magnificent creature guarding his flank. The wilderness, once a symbol of his isolation, now felt like an extension of their shared sanctuary. Shadow's keen senses were an extension of Jack's own, alerting him to distant wildlife, shifts in weather, or the subtle changes in the forest's mood. He learned to read Shadow's subtle cues, the flick of an ear, the slight turn of the head, the almost imperceptible tensing of muscles. They moved as one, a silent pact forged in the heart of nature. The hypervigilance that was once a symptom of his trauma now transformed into a shared awareness, a primal connection to the natural world. Jack began to sleep soundly, truly rest, for the first time in years. The weight on his shoulders lessened, the perpetual knot in his stomach loosened. He found himself smiling more, a genuine, unbidden expression that had been a stranger to his face for too long. Shadow hadn't just healed his wounds. He had rekindled a spark of life Jack thought forever extinguished. This profound connection, however, also deepened Jack's denial regarding Shadow's true nature. He saw a loyal companion, a gentle giant, a furry therapist. He chose to ignore the mounting evidence of Shadow's wildness, the predatory grace, the deep, guttural howls that seemed to call to something ancient in the forest, the unwavering, almost savage intensity in his gaze. He wouldn't acknowledge that this creature so vital to his healing could be something other than the abandoned pup he had rescued. To do so would be to invite a new kind of loss, a fear far greater than any battlefield trauma. Shadow was family, the only family he had, and the thought of that bond being broken was unbearable. This love, this deep, healing connection, blinded him to the approaching danger, to the inevitable clash between Shadow's wild heart and the rigid laws of the human world. The peace he found was fragile, built on a foundation of unspoken truths and willful ignorance, a calm before the storm that would soon descend upon his reclusive world, threatening to tear apart the very fabric of his newfound healing. The solitude of Jack's cabin, once a shield, began to feel like a fragile shell. The outside world, a distant hum he had long ignored, began to press in. A rare trip to the nearest small town, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of civilization, became necessary for supplies. Jack, ever cautious, usually left Shadow at the cabin, but on one particular day, a sudden, unforeseen need for a specific medication for an old injury forced his hand. The weather was unusually mild, and Jack, feeling a rare surge of confidence thanks to Shadow's calming presence in his life, decided to risk a quick run to town, leaving Shadow in the truck bed, covered, he hoped, by a tarp. He underestimated the animal's size and inherent curiosity, and perhaps his own growing carelessness. As Jack emerged from the small general store, a bag of groceries and the medication in hand, a murmur rippled through the few gathered townsfolk outside. A group of hunters, their faces weathered and stern, were staring not at Jack, but at his old pickup truck. Shadow, having pushed aside the tarp, sat upright in the bed, a majestic, imposing figure, his amber eyes surveying the surroundings with an almost regal aura. He was a magnificent sight, undeniably, but also undeniably different. The sheer scale of him, the dense, dark fur, the powerful build, and that piercing, intelligent gaze, it was too much for the quiet rural community. A burly man, known as Jed, a local hunter with a reputation for being rough but observant, stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "Jack," he drawled, his voice low, "what in tarnation is that you got there?" His gaze was fixed on Shadow, a mix of awe and suspicion warring on his face. "Looks a sight bigger than any dog I ever seen, and those eyes ain't dog eyes." Jack felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He tried to laugh, a forced, unconvincing sound. "Just a big Malamute mix, Jed. Found him as a pup, growing like a weed." He tried to project an air of nonchalance, but his heart was pounding. Shadow, sensing the tension, let out a low, soft growl, a sound that vibrated with power, though it wasn't aggressive. It was a warning, a declaration of presence. Jed's eyes widened slightly, a flash of fear crossing his weathered face. "That ain't no Malamute, Jack. I've seen enough wolves to know one when I see it. Not saying for sure, mind you, but that's mighty close, and if it is, well, you know the law." He gestured vaguely towards the wilderness. "They're protected, but they ain't pets, and if they cause trouble..." His voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the crisp air. The other townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances, their whispers growing louder. Jack felt a sudden, suffocating wave of paranoia. He knew Jed was right. He had chosen to ignore the growing signs, to dismiss the nagging doubts. But now, confronted by the raw suspicion of others, the truth felt dangerously close to being exposed. He quickly loaded his supplies, his movements stiff and hurried, acutely aware of the eyes on him, on Shadow. He jumped into the driver's seat, starting the engine with a roar that seemed to break the spell. As he drove away, he caught Jed's reflection in the rearview mirror, still standing there, watching them disappear down the dusty road, a thoughtful, troubled expression on his face. The casual trip had become a terrifying revelation. The illusion of his isolated sanctuary was shattered. Jack knew, with a chilling certainty, that the silent whispers would soon turn to louder questions, and those questions would eventually lead to answers he desperately wanted to avoid. The peace he had found with Shadow was now threatened, not just by his own internal demons, but by the watchful, scrutinizing eyes of the outside world. A world that didn't understand and wouldn't tolerate the wild heart of his beloved companion. The clock had begun to tick, and Jack could feel the cold breath of impending danger on his neck. The encounter in town left Jack shaken, the seed of doubt planted by Jed now sprouting into a thicket of anxiety. He knew he couldn't ignore the truth much longer, especially after Shadow developed a persistent cough, a raspy sound that sent shivers down Jack's spine. It wasn't just a minor ailment. It was a glaring vulnerability, a forced interaction with the very system he was trying to avoid. He tried home remedies, recalling old wilderness survival tips, but Shadow's condition didn't improve. The thought of losing Shadow, not just to the law, but to illness, was unbearable. With a heavy heart and grim determination, Jack made the agonizing decision to take Shadow to the nearest veterinary clinic, located in a slightly larger town an hour away, hoping to avoid familiar faces. Dr. Lena Petrova was a woman in her mid-30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had a reputation for being thorough, meticulous, and fiercely dedicated to animal welfare. When Jack led Shadow into the examination room, Lena's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Her professional composure wavered for a mere second before she regained her focus. Shadow, despite his illness, moved with undeniable power, his amber eyes observing Lena with an almost unsettling calm. He was magnificent, yes, but Lena, with years of experience with various breeds, knew immediately that this was no ordinary dog. "He's quite large, Mr. Miller," Lena stated, her voice even as she approached Shadow cautiously, her hand extended slowly for him to sniff. Shadow allowed it, a low growl in his chest that Lena recognized as a warning, not an invitation. "And those markings, his build, he doesn't fit any domestic breed I'm familiar with." Jack, trying to maintain a facade of casualness, shrugged. "Just a big mix, Doc. Found him as a pup in the snow. Growing like a weed, as you can see." Lena nodded, but her gaze was skeptical. She proceeded with the examination, her touch gentle but firm, palpating Shadow's chest, listening to his lungs, checking his teeth. Her brow furrowed further with each observation. Shadow's dental structure, his powerful jaw, the length of his canines, they were not typical of a domestic canine. "Mr. Miller," Lena finally said, her voice lowering, her intelligent eyes meeting Jack's. "I'm concerned. His respiratory symptoms are one thing, but frankly, I have serious doubts about his breed. Everything about him points to something wilder. His size, his musculature, his demeanor, and especially his physical characteristics. They are highly suggestive of a wolf, a purebred at that." Jack's heart plummeted to his stomach. He tried to protest, to argue, but the words caught in his throat. Lena held up a hand. "I understand this might be difficult to hear, but for his safety and yours, we need to be absolutely certain. If he is indeed a wolf, there are serious legal ramifications and specific care requirements that differ greatly from a domestic dog." She paused, then continued, her voice firm. "I strongly recommend a DNA test. It's the only way to be sure. It's a simple buccal swab, non-invasive, but it will give us definitive answers. Without it, I cannot effectively treat him, nor can I in good conscience ignore the possibility." Jack felt a wave of despair wash over him. He knew this was coming, but hearing it from a professional, seeing the certainty in Lena's eyes, made it terrifyingly real. He looked at Shadow, who was now resting his head on Jack's knee, his amber eyes full of unspoken trust. How could he betray that trust? But how could he not if it meant saving Shadow's life from this cough, and perhaps from a far greater danger? The choice was agonizing, but ultimately there was no choice. He needed to know. "All right, Doc," Jack finally conceded, his voice almost a whisper, defeat heavy in his tone. "Do the test." Lena nodded, a grim expression on her face. She knew the weight of this decision and the storm it could unleash. The swab was collected, a small, almost insignificant gesture that would soon shatter the delicate peace Jack had built, revealing a truth that would change everything. The days following the DNA test stretched into an eternity. Each hour heavy with an oppressive silence Jack had never truly noticed before. The rhythmic tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in his cabin seemed to mock him, counting down to an unknown verdict. He found himself trapped in a torturous limbo between the comforting illusion of Shadow as his dog and the terrifying reality that he might be harboring a wild, illegal creature. Sleep became elusive, haunted by vivid flashes of Lena's stern face, Jed's suspicious gaze, and the haunting, almost savage beauty of Shadow's eyes. He ate little, the food tasteless, his stomach a knot of dread. His perception of Shadow began to shift, irrevocably altered by Lena's words. He started observing the magnificent animal with a new, critical eye, no longer rationalizing away the anomalies. Shadow's silent movements through the cabin, once seen as graceful, now felt predatory. The way his ears swiveled, catching the faintest rustle of leaves outside, no longer just keen hearing, but the acute awareness of a hunter. The deep, resonant howls, once dismissed as a unique dog trait, now echoed with the unmistakable call of the wild, a primal lament to the moon. He noticed the way Shadow stalked squirrels in the forest, not playfully, but with a focused intensity, a lethal grace that spoke of instinct, not training. Jack spent hours just watching Shadow, trying to reconcile the gentle companion who nudged his hand during a nightmare with the untamed spirit Lena had described. He saw the loyalty, the unwavering affection, the way Shadow leaned into him, a massive, comforting weight. But he also saw the raw power, the latent wildness, the indomitable spirit that pulsed beneath the sleek black fur. He recalled the stories he'd heard about wolves, their cunning, their ferocity, their inherent danger to livestock and sometimes to humans. A shiver ran through him. Had he been naive? Had he put himself and potentially others at risk by bringing this creature into his isolated world? The thought of losing Shadow was a physical ache, an open wound in his chest. Shadow had become more than a pet. He was a lifeline, the very foundation of Jack's fragile recovery. To have him taken away, to be forced to surrender him, was a prospect more terrifying than any combat scenario he'd faced. He pictured the authorities arriving, their faces grim, the tranquilizer darts, the cold, clinical efficiency of removing a perceived threat. He imagined Shadow, confused, perhaps afraid, taken to an unknown fate. The idea was unbearable. He would fight them, he vowed, a fierce primal protectiveness rising within him. But what good would that do? He was one man against the law, against a system designed to protect the public. During these agonizing days, Shadow seemed to sense Jack's anguish. He followed Jack from room to room, his amber eyes full of silent concern. He would rest his head on Jack's lap, emitting soft, comforting rumbles, as if trying to soothe the turmoil within his human. This unspoken empathy only deepened Jack's internal conflict. How could something so wild, so potentially dangerous, be so gentle, so attuned to his emotions? It defied logic, shattered preconceptions. He desperately hoped for a miracle, a misdiagnosis, anything that would allow him to keep his beloved companion. But deep down, a cold, hard certainty was beginning to settle. The truth, like the Montana winter, was relentless, and it was coming. The waiting game was a crucible, forging a new resolve in Jack, a fierce determination to protect Shadow whatever the cost, no matter the truth that was about to be revealed. He knew his world was about to be irrevocably changed, and he braced himself for the impact. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a sharp, intrusive ring that shattered the cabin's unsettling silence. Jack stared at the phone, his hand trembling as he reached for it, knowing with a chilling certainty that his life was about to be irrevocably altered. It was Dr. Lena. Her voice, usually composed, was laced with an urgency that sent a fresh wave of dread through him. "Jack," she began without preamble, "the results are in. I need you to listen very carefully. This is critical." Jack's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent room. He closed his eyes tightly, bracing himself for the inevitable. "Shadow is not a dog, Jack," Lena continued, her voice softer now, almost empathetic. "He's a purebred northwestern wolf, Canis lupus occidentalis." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable, confirming every fear, every suppressed doubt. Jack felt a cold wave wash over him, a dizzying sensation that threatened to buckle his knees. He looked at Shadow, who lay near the fireplace, head resting on his paws, those amber eyes now seeming to carry the weight of ancient forests, the untamed spirit of the wilderness. He wasn't a big mix. He was a wolf, a creature of the wild, living in his home, a living, breathing paradox. "Jack, are you there?" Lena's voice cut through his stupor. "Yes, Doc, I'm listening." His voice was a hollow whisper. "What? What does that mean?" Lena sighed. "A sound of grave concern. It means you have an extremely dangerous and illegal animal in your possession. Northwestern wolves are a protected species, but they are also considered wild animals. Keeping him as a pet is strictly prohibited. It's a federal crime, Jack, and a serious one, not to mention the inherent danger. They are not dogs. Their instincts are primal, their power immense." "Oh, but he's gentle, Lena," Jack pleaded, a desperate edge to his voice. "He's never hurt anyone. He saved me. He healed me." Lena's tone hardened slightly. "I understand your attachment, Jack, I truly do, but the law doesn't make exceptions for emotional bonds, and even the gentlest wolf can revert to its wild instincts under stress. There's also the risk to the community, to livestock. The authorities won't see him as your companion. They'll see him as a threat, a liability." A chill ran through Jack. He knew she was right. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "They'll take him, won't they? They'll put him down." The last words were choked, raw with unshed tears. Lena's voice softened again, tinged with genuine sadness. "Jack, that's the most likely outcome. Wild animals in captivity, especially apex predators, are often deemed irredeemable for release and too dangerous for sanctuaries, particularly if they've been habituated to humans. Euthanasia is the standard protocol for animals like this." "You need to act fast, Jack," she urged, her voice regaining its urgency. "I haven't reported the results yet. I wanted to give you a chance to sort things out, but I can't hold on to this information indefinitely. My professional obligation requires me to report it within 24 to 48 hours. You need to get him somewhere safe or disappear. They will come for him, Jack, and when they do, they won't negotiate, they won't hesitate. They'll take him and put him down. I'm telling you this as a warning, as a friend, because I've seen enough to know what happens. You need to run, Jack, and you need to run now." The line went dead, leaving Jack in a terrifying silence, the weight of Lena's words crushing him. Run. But where? And how could he outrun the law, with a creature as conspicuous as Shadow? His world had just imploded, and the clock, once slow, now raced towards an inevitable, brutal confrontation. Lena's stark warning echoed in Jack's ears, each word a hammer blow against his fragile peace. "Run, Jack, run now." The urgency in her voice was a cold splash of reality. He looked at Shadow, who had risen, sensing Jack's anguish, his amber eyes fixed on him with an unsettling intensity. The wolf let out a soft whimper, a sound of empathy that twisted Jack's stomach. This magnificent creature, his healer, his protector, was now a ticking time bomb, a target. He couldn't let them take Shadow. He wouldn't. A fierce, primal resolve ignited within him, eclipsing the fear. His mind raced, desperately searching for a plan. Where could they go? The cabin, once a sanctuary, was now a trap. The wilderness, vast and unforgiving, was their only hope, but even there, they wouldn't be truly safe from the reach of human law. He began to move with frantic energy, grabbing essentials: food, water, a rifle, ammunition, a thick blanket for Shadow. He packed haphazardly, his movements jerky, driven by adrenaline and desperation. Shadow watched him, silent and attentive, occasionally nudging Jack's hand with his wet nose, a wordless question in his gaze. Jack felt a pang of guilt. He was dragging Shadow into a dangerous flight, all because of his own ignorance. "We have to go, boy," Jack whispered, his voice hoarse. "They're coming for you." He knelt, burying his face in Shadow's thick fur, inhaling the wild, earthy scent that had become so familiar, so comforting. He felt the powerful muscles ripple beneath his hands, a reminder of the raw strength he was trying to protect. He knew it was a fool's errand, a desperate gamble, but he saw no other choice. Surrendering Shadow was not an option. He loaded the few supplies into his old pickup truck. He had to assume Lena's call was a temporary reprieve, that the authorities would be notified soon. He had at best a few hours. He planned to drive deep into the national forest, to a remote, almost forgotten logging trail he knew, a place where the dense tree canopy and rugged terrain might offer some concealment. From there, they would go on foot, even deeper, into the untamed heart of Montana, hoping to disappear. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. As he was about to usher Shadow into the truck bed, a distant sound reached his ears. The faint, almost imperceptible hum of an engine. Not his trucks, but something larger, more deliberate, approaching on the winding forest road. His blood ran cold. They were too late. Lena's warning had been accurate, but the timeline even shorter than she'd predicted. He cursed under his breath, his heart sinking with a leaden weight. He looked at Shadow, whose ears were now pricked, head cocked, eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. The wolf had heard it too, his primal senses far superior to Jack's. There was no time to run, no time to hide. The sound grew louder, closer, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Panic seized Jack. He had failed. He had brought this magnificent creature into his life, given him a name, a home, love, only to lead him to this inevitable, brutal end. He felt a surge of helpless rage, a primal urge to protect Shadow, even if it meant sacrificing himself. He grabbed his rifle, chambering around, his knuckles white. Shadow, sensing the imminent threat, let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of pure, untamed power that vibrated through the very ground. He moved to stand in front of Jack, a massive, black silhouette against the snowy landscape, a living shield. The truck, a dark, imposing vehicle, rounded the last bend in the road, its headlights cutting through the dim afternoon light, illuminating the cabin and the two defiant figures standing before it. The task force had arrived, the sanctuary was breached, the fight for Shadow's life, and perhaps Jack's own, was about to begin. The desperate attempt to flee had failed, and now only confrontation remained. The dark, imposing vehicle that rounded the last bend was not a local sheriff's patrol car, but a heavy, unmarked SUV, its tinted windows reflecting the somber Montana sky. Behind it, a second truck, equally formidable, followed closely. Jack knew instantly this was no ordinary visit. It was a coordinated federal operation. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the silence that had fallen over the clearing. Shadow stood firm, a silent, unmoving guardian, his amber eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. The vehicles skidded to a halt, kicking up snow and gravel. 4 figures emerged, clad in tactical gear, their faces grim and determined. They moved with practical efficiency, hands resting on holstered weapons, eyes scanning the perimeter. 2 were uniformed officers, likely from the local sheriff's department, but the other 2, with their official-looking badges and serious demeanor, were clearly from a federal agency, likely the Fish and Wildlife Service, or perhaps even Fish and Game. Agent Miller, a tall, imposing man with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of authority, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Jack, then shifting with a visible jolt to Shadow. Jack Miller. Agent Miller's voice was calm but firm, echoing in the crisp air. "We have reason to believe you are harboring an illegal animal, specifically a northwestern wolf. We're here to confiscate the animal." Jack's grip on his rifle tightened, his knuckles white. He stood his ground, Shadow a powerful, silent presence at his side. "He's not an animal. He's family. Jack retorted, his voice rough with defiance. "And he's not illegal. He's a rescue. A dog." Agent Miller's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Miller, we have definitive proof, including DNA evidence, that the creature you possess is a purebred wolf. Your veterinarian, Dr. Lena Petrova, reported the findings to us this morning." A fresh wave of betrayal washed over Jack, but he suppressed it quickly. Lena had warned him she couldn't protect him indefinitely. "You're not taking him," Jack stated, his voice trembling but resolute. He raised the rifle slightly, a clear warning. The agents tensed, their hands moving closer to their weapons. "Mr. Miller, I strongly advise you to cooperate," Agent Miller said, his voice now hardened. "This is a dangerous situation. Wolves are wild animals. They are unpredictable. We have orders to tranquilize and remove the animal. Any resistance will be met with force. We don't want anyone to get hurt." Shadow, sensing the escalating tension, let out a deep, resonant growl, a sound that vibrated with untamed power. His hackles rose, his body tensed, a clear sign of his readiness to defend his human. The agents exchanged cautious glances, clearly impressed and perhaps intimidated by the wolf's formidable size and presence. "He's not unpredictable," Jack insisted, a desperate plea in his voice. "He's loyal, he's gentle, he's saved my life more times than I can count." "That may be true for you, Mr. Miller," Agent Miller countered, his voice unwavering, "but that doesn't change the law, nor the inherent risks. We cannot allow a wild apex predator to be kept as a pet, especially not near human habitation. It's a matter of public safety. Now, lower your weapon and step away from the animal." Jack stood motionless, torn between the overwhelming odds and his fierce loyalty. He knew he couldn't win this fight alone, but the thought of surrendering Shadow, of condemning him to euthanasia, was unbearable. The standoff was absolute, a silent, tense tableau against the stark backdrop of the Montana wilderness, the air thick with unspoken threats and desperate defiance. The agents began to spread out, slowly encircling Jack and Shadow, their movements deliberate, preparing to advance. The moment of truth, a brutal confrontation between man, law, and the wild heart of a magnificent creature, was now upon them. There was no escape, only the harsh reality of the impending battle. The clearing was a crucible of tension, the air thick with unspoken threats and the biting cold. Agent Miller's order hung heavy, demanding Jack's surrender. Jack's rifle, though pointed downwards, remained clutched in his trembling hands, a symbol of his desperate defiance. Shadow, a magnificent, silent sentinel, stood firm beside him, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his massive chest, his amber eyes never leaving the armed figures encircling them. He was a picture of untamed power, his hackles raised, a primal warning to those who dared approach his human. "Mr. Miller, this is your last chance," Agent Miller reiterated, his voice devoid of emotion, a cold, professional hardness replacing his earlier calm. "Step away from the wolf. We have tranquilizer rifles, and we will use them if necessary. But understand this. If the animal shows any aggression, or if it becomes a threat to our personnel, we are authorized to use lethal force. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to enforce the law and ensure public safety." The chilling implication of lethal force sent a fresh wave of despair through Jack. They weren't just there to take Shadow. They were there to end him if he resisted. "He's not a threat," Jack pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. "He's never hurt anyone. He saved my life. He's not a pet. He's a guardian. He helped me with my PTSD. He brought me back from the brink." He gestured wildly, trying to convey the deep, almost spiritual bond he shared with Shadow. The agents, however, remained impassive, their faces unreadable, their mission clear. To them, Jack was a misguided individual, attached to a dangerous illusion, and Shadow was merely an illegal wild animal posing a significant risk. "We understand your attachment, Mr. Miller," A female agent, Officer Davis, interjected, her voice slightly softer, perhaps trying to appeal to his reason. But a wolf, by its very nature, is a wild animal. It belongs in the wild, not in a cabin, however well-intentioned you are, and if it's been habituated to humans to this extent, releasing it back into the wild isn't an option. It would be a danger to itself and others. Euthanasia is the most humane, and frankly the only viable option in these circumstances. The word hung in the air, a death knell for Shadow, for Jack's peace. Jack felt a surge of helpless rage. Humane. That was a death sentence, coldly delivered. He looked at Shadow, whose gaze was now fixed on him, a deep trust in those intelligent amber eyes. How could he betray that trust? How could he stand by and let them take the one thing that had brought him back from the abyss? He would rather die fighting than allow them to harm Shadow. He tightened his grip on the rifle, his resolve hardening. Agent Miller, seeing the unwavering defiance in Jack's eyes, gave a subtle nod to his team. Two agents, one with a tranquilizer rifle, began to advance slowly, their movements deliberate, aiming to flank Shadow. The air crackled with anticipation. Shadow let out a deeper, guttural growl, a menacing sound that vibrated through the ground. A clear warning, his muscles tensed, ready to spring. Jack knew this was it. The standoff was about to explode into violence. He braced himself, preparing for the inevitable, for the desperate, futile fight he was about to wage against the cold, unfeeling machine of the law. He wouldn't surrender Shadow without a fight, not after all they had been through. The lives of man and wolf hung precariously in the balance, on the brink of a violent precipice. The first move was about to be made, shattering the fragile calm and unleashing chaos. The standoff reached its breaking point, the air thick with a desperate tension that stretched taut, ready to snap. The agents, their tranquilizer rifles aimed, began their slow, deliberate advance, eyes fixed on Shadow. Jack, rifle in hand, remained defiant, a human shield for the magnificent wolf at his side. Shadow, a coiled spring of muscle and fur, let out a low, menacing growl, his amber eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. The confrontation was seconds away from erupting into a tragic, violent ballet. Then the world exploded. It wasn't a gunshot, nor the lunge of a wolf. It was a sound far more primal, a deep guttural roar that tore through the forest from behind the approaching agents, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. A massive dark blur burst from the dense tree line, a force of nature driven by hunger, territorial rage, or perhaps just a cruel twist of fate. It was a grizzly bear, a colossal beast of muscle and claw, its fur matted and thick, its eyes burning with a wild, untamed fury. The bear, likely disturbed from its winter slumber by the commotion or drawn by the scent of potential prey, charged with terrifying speed, its target not Jack or Shadow, but the nearest cluster of human figures. Chaos erupted. The agents, caught completely off guard, yelled, their tactical training momentarily forgotten in the face of such raw, unexpected savagery. The bear was upon them in an instant, a whirlwind of teeth and claws. Agent Miller, who had been leading the advance, was the first to fall, violently knocked to the ground by a massive paw. His rifle flew from his grasp, skidding across the snow. Another officer, Officer Davis, tried to raise her tranquilizer rifle, but the bear swiped at her, sending her spinning. Her arm twisted at an unnatural angle, a scream of pain escaping her lips. The other two agents scattered, seeking cover, their own weapons momentarily useless against the sheer, overwhelming force of the enraged predator. Jack watched, utterly mesmerized and terrified, as the brutal ballet unfolded. The scene played out with sickening speed, a brutal tableau of primal violence. The air was filled with shouts, roars, and the sickening thud of impact. Blood bloomed crimson against the pristine white snow. He saw Agent Miller struggling on the ground, the grizzly bear rearing over him, its massive jaws snapping dangerously close to his head. Fear, cold, and paralyzing gripped Jack. He was a veteran, accustomed to combat, but this was different. This was raw, untamed nature, a force beyond human control. His first instinct, a deep-seated survival response, was to grab Shadow and flee, to take advantage of the chaos and disappear into the safety of the wilderness. He had his rifle. He could try to draw the bear's attention, buy them time. But as he turned to Shadow, his words caught in his throat. Shadow wasn't fleeing. He wasn't cowering. The wolf was absolutely motionless, his massive body tensed, his eyes blazing with an intensity Jack had never witnessed before. He wasn't looking at Jack, nor at the agents. His entire being was focused on the raging grizzly bear, a silent, powerful observer of the unfolding horror. The bear let out another thunderous roar, its attention fully on the struggling Agent Miller. It raised a paw, claws extended, ready to deliver a fatal blow. Jack closed his eyes for a split second, bracing himself for the inevitable, for the brutal end of a man who had come to take his friend. But then a different sound pierced the pandemonium, a sound that was both familiar and utterly unexpected, a sound of fierce, untamed loyalty. It was Shadow, letting out a guttural, defiant growl, a sound that vibrated with ancient power as he launched himself forward, not away from the danger, but directly into the heart of the storm. The wolf, his monster, was about to face a far greater monster, not for himself, but for the very humans who had come to destroy him. The ultimate test of loyalty was about to begin. The grizzly bear, poised to deliver a crushing blow to the fallen Agent Miller, paused, its massive head swiveling at the sound of Shadow's defiant growl. For a split second, the two apex predators locked eyes, ancient wilderness reflecting in their gazes. Then, with a speed that belied his size, Shadow launched himself forward, a black blur streaking across the snow. He didn't hesitate, didn't falter. He was a force of pure, unadulterated loyalty, a living weapon forged in the crucible of his bond with Jack. The wolf hit the bear's flank with surprising force, a powerful impact that momentarily staggered the much larger animal. The bear roared in surprise and fury, its attention ripped from Agent Miller, who scrambled away desperately, clutching his injured arm. Shadow, far smaller but infinitely quicker, danced around the bear, nipping at its legs, feinting and weaving, a master of evasive tactics. He wasn't fighting for dominance, but for diversion, for protection. He was buying time, drawing the bear's overwhelming aggression onto himself. Jack watched, utterly mesmerized and terrified, as the brutal ballet unfolded. This was no dog. This was a wolf. A creature honed by millennia of survival, fighting with breathtaking ferocity and intelligence. Shadow attacked with surgical precision, targeting the bear's vulnerable hindquarters, forcing the grizzly to constantly shift and turn, preventing it from bringing its immense weight and devastating claws to bear. The bear, enraged, swiped wildly, its claws tearing through the air, narrowly missing Shadow's agile form. The ground trembled with their struggle, snow flying, the air filled with the growls and roars of the two titans. One of the agents, the one with the tranquilizer rifle, managed to get to his feet. He raised his weapon, aiming not at Shadow but at the grizzly, his hands trembling. "Don't shoot!" Agent Miller yelled, now painfully struggling to his feet, his voice hoarse. "Don't hit the wolf! He's saving us!" The words, uttered by the man who had come to euthanize Shadow, hung in the air, a stark testament to the shocking turn of events. Shadow, meanwhile, made a risky move. As the bear lunged, he darted in, sinking his powerful jaws into the bear's front leg. The bear bellowed in pain and rage, shaking its leg violently, flinging Shadow away. The wolf landed hard in the snow, a whimper of pain escaping him. Jack's heart leaped into his throat. He wanted to rush to help, but knew he would only be another hindrance. He gripped his rifle, ready to shoot if Shadow was about to be overwhelmed, but hesitated, knowing a single shot could easily hit Shadow in the chaotic melee. But Shadow was not defeated. He shook off the impact, his eyes blazing with renewed determination. He was wounded, a dark stain blooming on his shoulder where a claw had raked him, but his will was unbroken. He circled the bear again, a low, guttural growl in his chest, a battle cry. He moved with renewed ferocity, a blur of black fur and snapping teeth. He was no longer just diverting, he was pushing the bear back, slowly but surely, towards the denser woods. The grizzly, bleeding and increasingly frustrated by the relentless, agile wolf, began to give ground, its roars turning to grunts of frustration. It had underestimated its opponent, and now, faced with such unwavering, intelligent aggression, its primal instinct to conserve energy and avoid prolonged conflict began to assert itself. With one last, desperate lunge, Shadow latched onto the bear's hind leg, twisting and pulling with all his might. The bear roared, stumbled, and then, with a final irritated huff, turned and lumbered away, disappearing into the dense tree line, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Shadow stood panting, head low, body heaving, a dark, magnificent silhouette against the white. He had done it. He had faced a creature far larger, far more powerful, and won. Not for himself, but for the humans who had come to take his life. The clearing fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the wolf's heavy breathing and the ragged gasps of the injured agents. The monster had become their savior. The silence that fell over the clearing after the grizzly's retreat was profound, a heavy blanket woven from shock and disbelief. Shadow stood among the scattered agents, his magnificent body heaving, a dark stain of blood marring his sleek black fur near his shoulder. He was wounded, yes, but triumphant, his amber eyes still burning with the fierce light of battle, though now tinged with exhaustion. He didn't look at the fleeing bear, but back at Jack, a soft, almost imperceptible whimper escaping his throat, a silent question in his gaze. Jack, rifle now lowered, rushed to Shadow's side, kneeling in the snow, his hands gently probing the wound. "Are you okay, boy? Are you okay?" His voice was thick with emotion, a mix of fear, awe, and an overwhelming surge of love and gratitude. Shadow leaned into his touch, a low, deep rumble emanating from his chest, a sound of profound comfort and security. The bond between them, already unbreakable, had been forged anew in the crucible of battle, hardened by sacrifice. The agents, slowly rising from the snow, were a tableau of shock and pain. Agent Miller, his arm bleeding profusely, stared at Shadow with an expression of utter perplexity. His former professional detachment shattered. Officer Davis cradled her twisted arm, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and reluctant respect. The tranquilizer rifle lay abandoned in the snow, its purpose now rendered absurd. They had come to destroy a threat, and that very threat had just saved their lives from a far greater danger. "My God," Agent Miller whispered, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on Shadow. He saved us. He took on a grizzly." He looked at Jack, a profound realization dawning in his eyes. "You were right, Mr. Miller. He's not just an animal. He's something else entirely." The shift in his perception was palpable, a seismic shift in his professional worldview. The rules, the protocols, the cold, hard letter of the law, they suddenly seemed inadequate, almost irrelevant in the face of such raw, selfless loyalty. The other agents, though injured and shaken, nodded in agreement. The image of the dangerous wolf had been irrevocably replaced by the image of a courageous protector, a creature of fierce, unwavering loyalty. The fear hadn't completely vanished, but it was now tempered by a deep, humbling respect. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that defied their training, their understanding, their very concept of wild versus domesticated. This wolf, habituated to a human, had chosen to protect those who sought to harm him, solely because they were part of his human's pack. First aid was administered to the injured agents, their wounds bandaged, their rattled nerves slowly calming. The immediate danger had passed, but the ramifications of what had just happened were immense. The mission to apprehend and euthanize Shadow was no longer an option. How could they, in good conscience, destroy a creature that had just risked its life to save theirs? The narrative had shifted, violently and unequivocally. The monster was a hero. The law, so rigid and unyielding, now faced an unprecedented challenge, a moral dilemma that would test its very foundations. Agent Miller, despite his pain, pulled out his satellite phone. He needed to report this, not just the grisly attack and their injuries, but the unbelievable life-saving intervention of the wolf. He knew the bureaucracy would balk, the regulations would scream, but he had witnessed the truth with his own eyes. He had felt the crushing weight of the bear, and he had seen Shadow's fierce courage. The perception of Shadow had changed, not just for the agents present, but for the entire system they represented. The quiet clearing in Montana had become the stage for a profound redefinition of loyalty, a testament to the extraordinary bond between man and beast, and a powerful challenge to the preconceived notions that govern their world. Agent Miller's satellite call to his superiors was, without a doubt, one of the most unusual and difficult reports he had ever made. He spoke with a newfound conviction, his voice resonating with the raw truth of what he had witnessed. He detailed the grisly attack, the injuries sustained by his team, and then, with unwavering clarity, described how the illegal and dangerous wolf named Shadow had, without hesitation, intervened, facing down the much larger predator and driving it away, saving their lives. He emphasized Shadow's intelligence, his ferocity, and above all, his unwavering loyalty to Jack, even in the face of agents who had come to take his life. The initial reaction from the other end of the line was, predictably, a mix of skepticism, disbelief, and bureaucratic resistance. An illegal wolf saved your team from a bear? Agent Miller, are you sure you're not concussed? Came the disembodied voice of a regional director. But Miller was resolute. Sir, I have 2 injured officers and my own injuries to confirm it. And I have Jack Miller, a decorated veteran who can corroborate every detail. This animal, sir, demonstrated extraordinary courage and selflessness. To euthanize him now would be an act of profound injustice, a betrayal of the very concept of duty and loyalty. The debate raged for hours, spanning state lines and federal jurisdictions. Wildlife regulations were clear. Possession of a wild wolf was illegal, and habituated wolves were typically deemed irredeemable and dangerous. Precedent dictated euthanasia, but the sheer heroism of Shadow's actions, confirmed by multiple witnesses, including the very agents meant to enforce the law, created an unprecedented ethical and public relations dilemma. News of the incident, though vague, had already begun to leak through local channels, hinting at a miraculous rescue by an unlikely hero. Finally, after much deliberation, legal consultations, and likely some heated arguments in the highest echelons, a decision was made. It was an extraordinary decision, a rare bending of rigid rules, a testament to the undeniable power of Shadow's actions. A special, unprecedented license would be granted. Shadow, the purebred northwestern wolf, would be allowed to remain in Jack Miller's care. The conditions were stringent, of course. Jack would be required to maintain Shadow's enclosure to specific, stringent federal standards, ensuring no possibility of escape or interaction with the public. Regular inspections by the Fish and Wildlife Service would be mandatory. Shadow would be microchipped and tracked. Jack would also have to undergo extensive training and education on wolf behavior and care, but these were minor details, gladly accepted by Jack, compared to the alternative. Shadow would live. He would stay with his human. Agent Miller, despite his injuries, personally delivered the news to Jack. His face, though still pale from blood loss, bore a genuine smile. "You won, Jack," he said, extending his uninjured hand. "Shadow won." He proved us all wrong. Jack, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, shook Miller's hand firmly. He looked at Shadow, who was resting near him, head on paws, his amber eyes watching them with a silent understanding. The wolf, his monster, had not only saved lives, but had also forced the human world to confront its own prejudices, to reconsider its definitions of wildness and loyalty. The decision was a landmark, a rare acknowledgement that sometimes an animal's heart and the bond it forms can transcend even the most inflexible laws. Shadow was no longer just an illegal animal. He was a living symbol of extraordinary loyalty, a testament to the profound connection that can exist between species. The license wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a recognition of a bond forged in the crucible of winter, tested by law and proven by fire. Montana's winter eventually yielded to spring, then summer, painting the landscape in vibrant greens and golds. But the indelible mark of that brutal season and the events it spawned remained. Jack and Shadow settled into a new, yet familiar rhythm of life. The cabin, once a haven of solitude, now hummed with a different kind of peace, a peace born not of isolation, but of a hard-won understanding and a deep, enduring loyalty. The special license, a rare document of federal recognition, hung framed on Jack's wall, a constant reminder of the day Shadow proved that love and courage know no species boundaries. Life was not without its adjustments. The enclosure, built to exact federal specifications, was a formidable structure, ensuring Shadow's safety and preventing any accidental encounters with the outside world. Regular visits from Fish and Wildlife Service agents, including Agent Miller, became part of their routine. These visits, initially formal and scrupulous, gradually evolved into respectful check-ins, with Miller often bringing treats for Shadow, a silent acknowledgement of the debt he owed. Jack, in turn, diligently studied wolf behavior, understanding his companion not just as Shadow, but as a magnificent wild creature whose instincts, though tempered by affection, remained primal. Shadow, meanwhile, thrived. His wound from the grisly encounter healed, leaving only a faint scar, a badge of honor. He remained Jack's constant companion, his silent guardian, his amber eyes still holding that ancient wisdom, now often softened by contentment. The deep, guttural howls still echoed through the forest, but now they seemed to carry a different cadence, a song of belonging, a declaration of his chosen pack. He was a wolf, yes, but he was Jack's wolf, an undeniable truth recognized by both man and, now, by law. Jack's PTSD, once a debilitating burden, had transformed. Nightmares were rare, and when they came, Shadow's comforting presence was a swift antidote. The hypervigilance had morphed into a keen awareness, a connection to the natural world that brought him a profound sense of peace rather than anxiety. He had found not just a companion, but a purpose, a reason to fully engage with life. Shadow hadn't just saved his life from a bear. He had saved Jack's soul from the ravages of war and loneliness. The story of Jack and Shadow became a local legend, a whispered tale of the veteran and his wolf, a testament to the extraordinary. It served as a powerful living lesson that loyalty, true and unwavering, transcends the artificial boundaries humans often erect between themselves and the animal kingdom. It spoke of acceptance, of recognizing the inherent worth and spirit in all living things, and of the profound, often unexpected ways in which healing can manifest. As the seasons turned, the bond between Jack and Shadow deepened, becoming an unspoken language, a shared existence in the heart of the Montana wilderness. Jack often sat on his porch, watching Shadow move with silent grace through the enclosure, a magnificent shadow against the setting sun. He knew the world outside might still see a dangerous wolf, an anomaly, a creature that defied categorization. But to Jack, Shadow was simply family, his truest friend. the wild heart that had brought him back to life. Their story was a silent triumph, a testament to the enduring power of connection, proving that sometimes the deepest lessons are learned not from books or laws, but from the untamed spirit of a creature found frozen in the snow, a creature whose loyalty proved stronger than any human prejudice, a powerful, living echo of Montana's wild heart. Their peace was vigilant, their bond eternal, a silent promise whispered to the wind.